There is a moment, and people who live in Miami will recognize it, when you stop calculating what you want and start calculating what you can still keep. It does not arrive all at once. It arrives the way the tide does. A grocery receipt that feels slightly too high. A renewal notice that makes you read the number twice. A conversation with a neighbor who tells you, almost casually, that they are leaving. Not visiting somewhere else. Leaving. For good. Miami has always been a city of arrivals. It was built on arrivals. From Cuba, from Haiti, from Colombia, from Venezuela, from New York, from everywhere that needed somewhere warmer, somewhere with less winter, somewhere with the promise that hard work and warm weather were enough. For generations, that was the deal. Show up, work, stay, build something. That deal is being renegotiated right now, and most families did not get a seat at the table. What is happening in Miami today is not simply about the wealthy displacing the poor, though that is part of it. It is about a structural shift in what is affordable to an ordinary family. A nurse, a teacher, a mechanic, a warehouse worker, a small business owner. The people who make a city run, the people who raise children here, send them to the local schools, eat at the restaurants, fill the pews, coach the little league teams, and in doing so, create the actual texture of daily life that makes any city worth living in. One study found that a family of 4 in Miami now needs to earn roughly $230,000 a year to live comfortably. The median household income in Miami is just over $66,000. In Hialeah, it drops to about $57,000. That gap between what the city requires and what the city pays is not a gap anymore. It is a canyon, and ordinary families are watching from the edge, trying to figure out which side they belong on. According to Newsweek, a poll found that more than half of Miami-Dade residents have seriously considered leaving because of the cost of living. Think about what that number means. More than half. Not a fringe feeling, not the complaint of people who simply want more than they have. More than half of the people living here have looked at their own city and thought, I might not be able to stay. This video is about 12 things that are quietly, steadily moving beyond the reach of ordinary Miami families, and what that reveals about a city in the middle of a transformation that no one voted for. Number 12. The first thing most families start to notice is the grocery bill. It seems like such a small place to start. Groceries, the weekly routine, the list on the refrigerator, the cart in the aisle, the beep at checkout. But something changed in that routine, and it changed in a way that kept not going back. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index for the Miami-Fort Lauderdale-West Palm Beach area, the food index in Miami rose more than 2% over the past 12 months, with food at home, the things you buy at the supermarket, increasing across all 6 major grocery store food groups. Nationally, the USDA's Economic Research Service tracked a 5-year increase in grocery prices that compounded to roughly 28% between 2020 and 2025. For the average American family, that translated to paying about $310 more for the same groceries in 2025 compared to 2024, according to a report from the U.S. Congress Joint Economic Committee. In South Florida, those numbers land differently. The cost of living in Miami is already about 17% higher than the national average, with food expenses running roughly 5% above that average, according to Salary.com. That means every national increase in grocery prices gets layered on top of a market that was already more expensive than most of the country. Ground coffee, ground beef, eggs. These are the things families notice first because they are the things families buy every single week. Meat, poultry, fish, and eggs in the Miami area jumped more than 5% year over year. Eggs alone soared more than 27% in a single 12-month span, according to CBS Miami reporting on Bureau of Labor Statistics data. What this produces in a South Florida household is not dramatic. It is not a crisis moment. It is a slow arithmetic. the rotisserie chicken instead of the cut of steak, the store brand cereal, the habit, almost unconscious, of checking the price before the item goes in the cart. Some residents report putting groceries on credit cards just to maintain the same weekly shop they have been doing for years. Others have shifted to discount stores that a few years ago felt like a last resort and now feel like the only sensible choice. The strange thing about this is that Miami is surrounded by water on 3 sides and sits within reach of one of the most productive agricultural regions in the country. Florida grows an extraordinary variety of food, and yet, walking into a Publix in Brickell or a Winn-Dixie in Hialeah, the prices reflect not what is grown nearby, but what the market will bear in a city that has become, by several measures, one of the least affordable in the country. And if that is where the pressure begins, at the grocery store, the places it ends are much harder to absorb. Number 11. Before a family can afford anything, they have to be able to afford where they live. And in Miami right now, that word, afford, is being tested in ways that have not been seen since the city's founding era. The numbers here are not subtle. According to a Moody's Analytics report from April 2024, Miami rent increased by 32.2% between 2020 and 2024. The national average increase over the same period was 19.3%. Miami outpaced the rest of the country by more than a third. By the end of that same period, Miami sat just behind New York City as the second least affordable metropolitan area in the United States. Median home prices in Miami reached $675,000 by late 2024, according to reporting based on Wall Street Journal data. The median home price rose from $400,000 in 2021 to approximately $650,000 by 2025, an increase of more than 60% in 4 years. Sales of homes priced above $1 million surged 147% year over year during the same stretch, reflecting how thoroughly the luxury market began to define what was being built and who it was being built for. For renters, a 1-bedroom apartment in Miami averaged about $1,190 per month as of early 2025. A 2-bedroom, the minimum most families with children require, averaged over $2,100. In neighborhoods like Brickell or the Design District, those numbers climb considerably higher. According to the University of Florida and Miami Homes for All, half of all households in Miami-Dade County were spending more than 30% of their income on housing, even in the years leading up to the post-pandemic boom. The standard financial advice is to spend no more than 30%. Half of Miami's households were already over that line before the most dramatic rent increases arrived. And the county is not simply unaffordable at the margins. According to Miami Homes for All, Miami-Dade faces the largest affordable housing shortfall in the country. Short approximately 90,000 units for households earning below $75,000 a year. That figure represents real families. A teacher earning $52,000, a hospital orderly at $38,000, a logistics worker at $45,000, people who are employed, sometimes in 2 jobs, whose incomes are simply no longer adequate to compete for housing in the market that surrounds them. The typical Miami area homeowner now pays nearly $4,100 per month when mortgage, insurance, and property taxes are combined, according to reporting from the Miami Herald and Florida Atlantic University. That number requires a household income most Miami families do not have. UBS ranked Miami's housing market as the #1 real estate bubble in the world for the second consecutive year in its 2025 analysis. The report defines a bubble as a substantial and sustained mispricing of homes. Median single-family home prices have risen at least 70% since the summer of 2019 across the 3 major South Florida counties. The national median increase over the same period was 50%. Miami ran ahead of even that. There is something quietly painful about the way longtime residents describe this. Not outrage, necessarily. Something closer to bewilderment. The neighborhood where someone grew up, where their parents paid a mortgage that felt reasonable, where children rode bikes in the street after school, That neighborhood is now valued at a price that the same family could not afford to buy into today. Number 10. You cannot separate housing from what happens to neighborhoods when people can no longer afford to stay in them. Walk through Overtown today and you will see it with your own eyes. The Lyric Theater, where James Brown and Ella Fitzgerald once performed, and where the Black community of Miami gathered to share something that mattered. The theater still stands, but towering above it is the rising shell of a luxury high-rise under construction. Yellow cranes visible against the sky. The contrast is not subtle. It is almost architectural in its bluntness. Overtown, along with Alapata, Little Haiti, Liberty City, and parts of Coconut Grove, sits along what climate scientists call the Miami Rock Ridge, a limestone spine that runs through the city at an elevation of roughly 9 feet above sea level, about 3 feet higher than Miami's coastal average, in a city that floods, in a county that is acutely aware of what rising seas mean for coastal real estate. Elevation has become its own form of currency. What researchers and community advocates call climate gentrification is an active force reshaping these neighborhoods. Developers fleeing flood risk along the coast are moving investment inland and upward, literally upward to higher ground. And the communities that have lived on that elevated terrain for generations are now caught in the path of capital that they cannot compete with. Miami rent increased by 32.2% between 2020 and 2024, per Moody's Analytics, with the burden falling hardest on historically Black and immigrant neighborhoods that were already under pressure. In Little Havana, Wynwood, and Little Haiti, the gentrification process that began with art galleries and coffee shops has accelerated into something harder to reverse. Longtime Latino and Caribbean families find themselves in buildings whose owners have calculated that a full renovation and a higher income tenant pool is more profitable than the community that has lived there for 20 or 30 years. The snake plant, which can survive almost anywhere, in lots and empty spaces, without anyone tending it, has become an unofficial symbol of what happens to a neighborhood that is being held, waiting, by an absentee landlord until the market is right to cash out. Community organizers in Little Havana have noticed them spreading across vacant lots owned by investors who are not there and do not have to be. Roughly 67,000 people left Miami-Dade County between 2023 and 2024 for other parts of Florida or other states entirely. According to U.S. Census Bureau data, that number represents not just individuals, but networks, families. The woman who has attended the same church in Overtown for 30 years. The man who has been cutting hair on the same block in Little Havana for 2 decades. When they leave, something leaves with them that no luxury building can replace. Number 9. There is a question that families in Miami used to be able to answer with reasonable confidence. What will this city cost us? What do we need to make? What can we plan for? That question has become almost impossible to answer honestly. And one of the primary reasons is an expense that almost nobody talks about when they talk about the cost of living in Miami. But that sits in the monthly budget like a stone. Homeowners insurance. Florida's average annual cost of home insurance reached $8,292 in 2025, according to Insurify's 2026 Insuring the American Homeowner Report. That represents an 18% increase over 2024 alone. The national average is roughly $2,181. Florida homeowners pay more than double the national average. But in Miami-Dade County, the numbers are more severe still. In 2024, according to data from First Street Foundation, a nonprofit that researches and communicates climate risk, Miami-Dade homeowners saw insurance premiums increase by 322%, the highest reported increase among the largest metropolitan areas in the United States. Not 32%, not 132%, 322%. A senior in Hollywood Hills described paying more than $9,000 per year to insure her 2,600 square foot house, up from $3,500 5 years earlier. The Sun-Sentinel reported her story alongside countywide data showing that Miami-Dade's average insurance premium reached $6,170 per year by September 2024, a 21% increase from March 2022. In Fort Lauderdale and Broward County, the increase was even steeper. For homeowners in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Hollywood, average annual premiums now exceed $7,000 according to Florida real estate market data. Some analyses have placed the average annual premium in Miami specifically at over $10,000 when all coverage types are included. The reasons are real and compounding. Florida has experienced at least $34 billion weather events since 2020, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Hurricanes Helene and Milton in 2024 alone generated roughly 300,000 insurance claims. Insurers have responded by raising rates, leaving the market, or both. Citizens Property Insurance, the state-backed insurer of last resort, has sought repeated rate increases. The market has narrowed. The prices have climbed. For a working family already stretched by rent or a mortgage, this expense has become something close to impossible to manage. It is not discretionary. You cannot opt out of it if you have a mortgage. It is simply there, every year, demanding more. And in a city that sits between the ocean and increasingly severe hurricane seasons, it is not going to get easier. Number 8. There is no city in America where the cost of owning and operating a car punishes ordinary families more consistently than Miami. There is no functional public transit alternative for most residents. The Metro Rail covers specific corridors, but nothing like the density of routes that a family in an outer neighborhood like Hialeah, Kendall, or Cutler Bay would need to do their actual daily lives. Miami is structurally a car city. You need one, and that need is being turned into something almost punitive. According to a CostPay analysis of commuting costs across the 100 largest U.S. cities, Miami is the most expensive city in the country for car commuting, with an annual commute cost of $2,656. 9 of the 10 most expensive commuting cities in the nation are in Florida, and Miami is at the top. Above average gas prices, longer commutes, and, critically, extraordinarily high car insurance premiums combine to make getting to work one of the most expensive decisions a Miami family makes every day. Car insurance premiums in Miami averaged approximately $408 per month for full coverage as of 2025, according to Insure.com. For minimum coverage, drivers pay roughly $186 to $265 per month, still far higher than the national average. Between 2023 and 2025, average car insurance rates in Miami changed by about 47%, a swing of roughly $1,500 in annual cost. Minimum coverage in Miami runs about 256% higher than the national average. The reasons are a compound of Miami-specific realities. The city has more than 12,000 people per square mile, creating both traffic density and accident risk. Miami ranked 7th in the United States for hours lost to traffic in 2025, with the average driver losing 72 hours per year, according to Insurify. The city also remains a documented hub for organized vehicle theft rings. Miami-Dade ranked number 1 in Florida and number 17 nationally by theft volume in 2025, according to the National Insurance Crime Bureau. Even after a 28% drop in the first half of that year, for a family with 2 working adults, both of whom need to drive because the transit infrastructure does not cover their roads, the combined monthly cost of 2 car payments, 2 insurance premiums, gas, and maintenance can easily reach $1,500 or more. That is before a single repair, before a tire blowout, before an accident. It is a recurring cost that simply keeps demanding more. The Dolphin Expressway, Interstate 95, US, Route 1. These are the arteries through which Miami's workforce moves, and they move slowly, expensively, and with an insurance bill attached. Number 7. Ask any Miami parent what the single most clarifying financial experience of raising young children has been in recent years, and many We'll give you the same answer before you finish the question. Childcare. The Women's Fund Miami-Dade published a report in late 2025 that described a billion-dollar crisis in the region's childcare market. The numbers in that report are not abstractions. The average cost of full-time daycare for an infant in Miami-Dade had reached $13,560 per year, more than $100 per month. That figure is more than double the annual in-state tuition at any of Florida's public universities. But unlike college tuition, which can be financed over 20 years of student loans, childcare has to be paid every single month in advance, while the child is an infant and entirely dependent. According to Winnie, a childcare research platform, Miami families pay around $1,250 per month for infant care at licensed centers, the highest in the state of Florida. Families with 2 children can expect childcare costs approaching $18,000 to $20,000 per year. The Women's Fund CEO, Mariah Myers, said plainly, "We know that's just not on the table for most people." What happens when it is not on the table? One parent, often the one earning less, often the mother, leaves the workforce, or reduces hours, or takes on work that can be done from home during nap times, or relies on a grandparent who may or may not be healthy enough, available enough, willing enough to absorb that labor. The cost of childcare does not disappear when a parent leaves work to provide it. It simply moves from the household budget into the household itself, redistributed as exhaustion and reduced income. Florida Tax Watch, in a 2025 update to a prior report, found that the lack of affordable childcare was costing Florida's economy billions of dollars annually in lost productivity, absenteeism, and workforce dropout. About 15% of working Florida parents, nearly 200,000 people, reported having to quit, decline, or significantly change a job because of childcare problems. In Miami-Dade, where the median household income is around $66,000, paying $13,560 per year for a single infant in daycare means devoting roughly 1 in every $5 of pre-tax income to that one child's care alone. Add a second child, which was once considered an entirely ordinary aspiration, and the arithmetic becomes an obstacle to basic financial stability. Number 6. One of the quietest and most consequential shifts happening in Miami is one that plays out not in the headlines but in the school enrollment data. Miami-Dade County Public Schools is the 3rd largest public school district in the United States. For decades, its growth reflected Miami's growth. New families, new children, new classrooms. The school district was an institution that absorbed the city's arrivals and shaped them into something shared. That growth is reversing. For the 2024-2025 school year, Miami-Dade County Public Schools enrolled approximately 313,220 students in the first 9 days, down from 326,279 the prior year, a decline of more than 13,000 students. Superintendent Jose Dotres described it as one of the district's lowest enrollment figures in recent history. For the 2025-2026 school year, the district had projected a decrease of 5,000 students and then lost an additional 8,000, producing a total reduction of over $13,000, a 4% decline. The superintendent identified 3 contributing factors: falling birth rates, fewer new immigrants arriving, and families leaving South Florida. The cost of living was cited explicitly. A 90% increase in housing costs since before the COVID-19 pandemic was identified as a primary driver of the 67,418 residents who moved out of Miami-Dade between 2023 and 2024, according to reporting by Cavs Connect, a student news outlet at Coral Gables Senior High School. I know someone who left Miami-Dade because of the overall cost of living and the lack of opportunities. One senior at the school said, "They ended up moving to Orlando, where it was more affordable." Situations like this will continue to affect our schools, because as more families leave, schools face declining enrollment, which can lead to less funding, fewer programs, and potential school closures. That is exactly what is happening. The drop in enrollment translates directly into a drop in state funding under Florida's Education Finance Program. Superintendent Dotres announced budget restrictions in response, reduced hourly personnel, halted overtime, restricted travel. The district that educated children through the Cuban Missile Crisis, through the Mariel boat lift, through 5 decades of extraordinary demographic change, is now cutting costs because the city has become too expensive for the families that would have filled those classrooms. Number 5. There is something almost surreal about the situation facing families who do own homes in Miami, who made it over the threshold, who bought something, who planted what felt like a flag of permanence, and are now discovering that home ownership itself has become a source of financial instability. The issue is not just the price of the home, it is what the home now costs to carry every single month. Mortgage, property taxes, homeowners insurance, flood insurance, if the home sits in a flood zone, and in Miami, that is not a small category. Together, these obligations have pushed the monthly cost of home ownership far beyond what the same property required 5 years ago. The First Street Foundation found that Miami-Dade homeowners experienced a 322% increase in insurance premiums in 2024, the highest of any major metro in the country. For a homeowner who has lived in the same house for 15 years and has not moved, has not changed their life in any meaningful way, a 322% increase in a single year represents a financial shock for which there was no warning and no preparation. Flood risk compounds this. A Climate Central analysis found that some Miami neighborhoods face annual flooding by 2025 under current sea level projections. The Miami New Times reported on projections suggesting that frequently flooded locations could see resident flight as early as 2028 in Miami-Dade County. Homes in lower elevation coastal areas are already being discounted as buyers factor in long-term flood risk. Zillow data in late 2025 showed Miami-Dade home values down 3.7% year over year, even as most of the rest of the country saw prices still rising. This creates an uncomfortable paradox. Homeowners who need to sell find a softening market. Homeowners who want to stay find rising carrying costs. And the families who most need to understand the long-term trajectory of their investment, the ones who put their entire financial identity into a Miami home, are caught between a market inflating beyond reason and an environmental reality that is beginning to assert itself in the form of insurance bills, flood disclosures, and actuarial math that does not lie. Number 4. The cost of getting sick in Miami is something most families try not to calculate because the number, fully assembled, is almost impossible to look at. Healthcare costs in the United States have risen 20% since 2020, according to a 2025 brief published by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In 2024, the average cost of family health coverage was $25,570 per year, a 7% increase over the prior year. For a family earning $66,000 in Miami, that single expense represents 38% of gross income before housing, food, childcare, transportation, or insurance are paid. Many families in Miami-Dade are employed in industries, hospitality, retail, construction, domestic work, where employer-sponsored healthcare is limited or non-existent. 1 in 3 families in Miami-Dade County earns below $35,000 per year. And for those households, healthcare is not a benefit that can be assumed. It is a calculation that gets deferred, delayed, and avoided until the cost of deferring it becomes its own emergency. The emergency room at Jackson Memorial Hospital in the Health District neighborhood of Miami remains one of the busiest in the country. Walk-in clinics in Hialeah and West Little River see families who have not seen a primary care physician in years because the cost and the time required are simply not things their budget or their schedule can absorb. The people working 2 jobs to pay rent do not have an afternoon free for a preventive care visit. The person choosing between a copay and a utility bill is making a real calculation with a wrong answer on both ends. This is one of those places where the data and the human reality are almost interchangeable. Healthcare costs rising faster than wages. Wages in Miami rising at roughly 4.6% year over year as of early 2026, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but outpaced by the combination of housing, insurance, childcare, food, and transportation increases that together make the bottom line harder every year. Number 3. What all of the numbers in this video describe, at their core, is a single sentence. The gap between what Miami costs and what Miami pays is now large enough to be structurally permanent. The MIT Living Wage Calculator, updated annually, estimates what a single adult and various household configurations must earn to meet basic needs in Miami-Dade County. For a family of 4 with 2 working adults, that living wage requirement increased by $2,000 to $4,000 per year in 2025 compared to 2024. 1 year's increase, not 5 years, 1 year. Meanwhile, the median household income in Miami remains just over $66,000. The gap between what MIT's calculator says a family of 4 needs to live here comfortably, roughly $230,000, and what the median household actually earns is not a policy failure that can be corrected with a raise. It is a structural incompatibility. It means that the city, as currently priced, is not designed for the people who live in it. NBC6, South Florida reported in early 2026 that while a family of 4 should be making around $230,000 to live comfortably in Miami, the median household income sits at just over $66,000. That is a gap of more than $160,000 per year. It means that for a typical Miami family, financial stability, not luxury, not excess, just stability, is mathematically out of reach under current conditions. The consequence is not abstract. Nearly half of all Floridians are living paycheck to paycheck, according to Florida Atlantic University survey data. More than 80% of Floridians say buying a home is harder than it was 5 years ago. Half have considered leaving the state because of the cost of living. These are not statistical anomalies. They are the accumulated pressure of a city whose price tag has outgrown the people who built it. Number 2. There is a generation of young adults in Miami right now who grew up watching their parents make it work, watching the house get bought, the car get paid off, the tuition get saved for, and who have now done the math on their own lives and arrived at a different answer. They are often children of immigrants, often children of the working class. They were told correctly that education and work and time would be enough, that Miami was a city of possibility, that the same trajectory their parents walked was available to them. The trajectory has changed. Rent on a 1-bedroom apartment in a reasonable Miami neighborhood absorbs a disproportionate share of a starting salary in nursing, teaching, social work, or public service. A family formation, a mortgage, a child, a car, an insurance bill requires a financial foundation that entry-level or even mid-career wages in most of Miami's dominant industries do not provide. The result is that young Miami families are delaying children, delaying home ownership, delaying the kinds of decisions that previous generations made in their late 20s as a matter of course. Some are leaving for Tampa, for Orlando, for Jacksonville, for cities where the same salary goes visibly further. The ones who stay often do so at significant personal cost, crowding into living situations they would not have chosen, working hours they do not want, deferring retirements and repairs and medical appointments in a constant triage of the budget. Roughly 67,000 people left Miami-Dade between 2023 and 2024. Miami-Dade school enrollment dropped by more than 13,000 students in a single year. These numbers are related. They are the same story told in different registers. A city that has priced out the people who would have been its next generation of nurses, teachers, parents, neighbors, and community members is not replacing them. It is losing them to places that cost less and ask less and offer at least the possibility of the life that Miami used to represent. Number 1. The first thing that disappears when a city becomes too expensive is not something you can photograph or put in a graph. It is something more like memory, the sense that a place belongs to the people in it. Little Havana's Calle Ocho has been the living room of Miami's Cuban community since the early 1960s. Families gathered there. Children grew up hearing Spanish and smelling Cuban coffee and watching the domino players in Maximo Gomez Park, who have been there so long they are almost a monument themselves. The block parties, the annual Calle Ocho festival, the bodegas and ventanitas, the walk-up windows where cafecito costs less than $1 and the exchange is as much social as commercial. These are the things that made that neighborhood feel like it belonged to someone. Some of that is still there, but the pressure around it has intensified in ways that are now difficult to deny. Rezoning, development proposals, the slow replacement of affordable housing with market-rate construction that the families who built the neighborhood cannot afford. When a family that has been on the same block for 30 years gets a lease renewal with a number that is not a negotiation but a removal, they do not usually call the newspaper. They call their cousin in Hialeah, or their brother in Kissimmee, or they just start packing. Overtown has seen this for longer than anywhere. A neighborhood that once hosted jazz legends. That was the center of Black Miami's cultural life before the interstate carved through it in the 1960s. A construction project that destroyed hundreds of homes and permanently altered the community's geography is now experiencing a second wave of transformation as elevated land attracts developers seeking high ground above future floodlines. The Lyric Theater still stands. The construction crane above it is not a symbol of renewal for the families who have lived there for generations. What is being lost in Miami, and this is the thing that the numbers only partly capture, is not just affordability in the abstract. It is the specific, particular, irreplaceable experience of belonging somewhere, of having a neighborhood that knows your name, of raising children in the house your parents once lived in, of building something across generations that has weight and meaning and continuity. When a city loses that, when the ordinary people who constitute its actual life can no longer afford to stay, it does not become empty. It fills back up with someone else, someone wealthier, perhaps, someone newer. But the city that existed before, the city that was built by the people who are now being priced out, that city does not come back. More than half of Miami-Dade residents have considered leaving because of the cost. 67,000 actually did in a single year. The schools lost 13,000 children. These are not statistics. They are a city saying goodbye to itself. Cities have always changed. That is not the story here. The story here is the pace of the change and who bears the cost of it. When a place as particular as Miami, a city that has been built and rebuilt by waves of people who arrived with nothing and made something, begins to price out the very families who have continued that tradition, something fundamental is being altered, not destroyed, necessarily, not gone yet, but altered in ways that are very difficult to walk back. The families who can no longer afford a starter home in Kendall, who pay more for car insurance than for groceries, who choose between a daycare deposit and a month's rent, who watch their neighbors leave and have started to wonder when their own turn will come. Those families are not asking for anything extraordinary. They are asking for the deal that Miami used to offer. The deal that said, come here, work hard, and you can build a life. Whether Miami can still make that promise is a question the city's numbers are currently answering on their own. And the answer they are giving is complicated and harder every year to dispute, which raises a question worth sitting with. If Miami, with its warmth, its culture, its decades of offering ordinary families a foothold, is reaching a point where the foothold is no longer available to most people. What does that mean for the cities still behind it on this curve? Which American city will face this reckoning next?